G'day, I'm DK.
And I'm Ardeet.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Two Ticks Town Talk, a segment from the Australia Talks podcast.
Yeah, this is one of our favourite parts of bringing the podcast to you, our listeners.
So please enjoy this segment from the regular podcast.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, fair man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share, man.
All right, this week's Two Ticks Town Talk. I'm travelling up to Toowoomba in Queensland. Now, while Toowoomba quickly became a city, it was a small settlement at the time of the story I'm bringing you this week. So a few details. It's a city on the border of southeast Queensland and the Darling Downs region, a rich agricultural region, 132 k's west of Brisbane, and its urban population in 2021 was 142,000, making it Australia's second most populous inland city after Canberra and the second largest regional centre in Queensland. So it's on the crest of the Great Dividing Range, and it's about 600 to 800 metres above sea level on the edge of a plateau. Got a whole lot of public parks, and it's known as Garden City due to its volcanic soil supporting extensive parkland. Tree-lined streets with jacaranda, camphor laurel and plane trees, and festivals such as the Carnival of Flowers in September. So it was settled in 1842, declared a municipality in 1860, a town in 1892, and a city in 1904. So that's a bit uncommon for a lot of the places that we hear on our Two Ticks Town Talks, but that just rocketed from settlement to city in, what's that, 62 years. That's pretty bloody quick.
Yeah.
Look, there's lush pastoral areas there, so people wanted to settle there. So prior to European settlement, the escarpment was home to the Barangum Aborigines, and the area was founded on the lands of the Djabal and Jarawar people, with Djabal extending south and Jarawar north of the city. The Ugarapul people of the Yugara language nation are traditional owners of the land near Tabletop Mountain. And the origin of the name Toowoomba is from the language of the local Barangum people, and it's been argued as to whether it means the swamp, a variety of melon which grows on the banks of the swamp, or the reeds on the edge of the swamp. So in the 1840s, Toowoomba was a stopping point from Moreton Bay on the east coast of Queensland to all those pastoral properties on the Darling Downs. Now, before I get into the story, one factoid of note suggests, and there's two other claims to this, but suggests that the Lemington, that our well-known Aussie treat, was first served in Toowoomba when Lord Lemington took his entourage to Harlaxton House to escape the steamy heat of Brisbane. So they're claiming that, and it seemed as good a story as the other two. Apparently he said to the cook, we need something. The cook said, oh God, and had a bit of a, all right, well, I've got this cake, I'm going to dip it in chocolate. And there was, I think his wife or another cook was familiar with using coconut in cooking, which was uncommon back then. They rolled it in there. It's sort of like, oh, magnificent. So we often note in our Two Ticks Town Talks how poorly and tragically the interaction between Europeans and Aborigines turns out in Australian history. A lot of those form part of an overall history called the Frontier Wars. And just next to Toowoomba is where one of the best known battles took place. It's known as the Battle of One Tree Hill, and it's this week's Two Ticks Town Talk story or focus. So it took place on 12th of September 1843 at Tabletop Mountain, which is only about 10 k's from the centre of Toowoomba. And in those days, it was known as One Tree Hill. So it formed part of the Upper Brisbane Lockyer campaign and the War of Southern Queensland within the Australian Frontier Wars. The battle involved Aboriginal warriors led by Multigurra, who was a warrior, strategist and diplomat of the Yuggurapal people, Yuggurapal nation from the Yuggurra language nation. Multigurra was the son of a bloke called Old Moppy, who was a respected warrior in his own right. Multigurra united mountain tribes and clans, including at least 7 neighbouring groups, in an armed resistance against the Europeans. There's over 100 Aboriginal warriors from the mountain tribes alliance that participated in the battle. And then on the opposing side, there's British colonists, squatters and their servants, initially 18 armed men guarding the 3 bullock drays pulled by about 50 bullocks with 35 to 50 reinforcements in the counterattack. The conflict escalated following the mass poisoning of approximately 50 or 60 Aboriginal people at Kilcoy Station in 1842 using flour laced with strychnine. So you can understand why Multigurra and his mob were had blood in their eyes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Multigurra had warned Europeans not to come through the area, but they ignored the threats. So he organised ambushes on supply drays along the mountain road that had been built for commerce between Moreton Bay and Darling Downs. In the initial ambush, the warriors placed logs across the road as barricades and attacked from concealment in the creek bed and thick bush on a steep and boggy stretch. The armed settlers, they were forced to stop and fled back to a place called Boniface Inn, 34 k's away, and abandoning the drays. So the warriors sacked the drays, drove off the bullocks and held a corroboree, feasting on bullock meat. There was then a counter-attack the following morning by 35 to 50 armed settlers and servants on horseback that surprised the Aboriginal camp at dawn. There was a number of warriors killed or wounded. They retreated up the steep slopes of One Tree Hill to a planned defensive position where they had stockpiled boulders and stones and spears. So from the high ground, they hurled the spears down, rocks and boulders at the pursuers, wounded several of the settlers. I don't know whether they made a note of it, including one in the buttocks. Which I don't know. It was in 2 sources that they met. It could have come from the same thing, but yeah, it was
Well, that sort of feels a bit weird though, because was he running away? Like, how did they get him in the butt?
I don't know. They didn't go into that. I didn't even think that. He might have been running away. It might have just been bad luck, or he might have been showing off or something. Also, the rocks and that, which shattered some of the muskets, so it forced the advance to halt. So the settlers retreated. They were bogged down in mud in places and camped at the initial ambush site. And then Border Police under Commissioner Stephen Simpson arrived the next day, but checked out the situation and said, no, not going to be doing another assault without reinforcements due to the barricaded road. So it's notable as one of the largest battles in the Australian Frontier Wars, and it was a rare pitched battles in which the Aboriginal forces comprehensively routed the colonists, and it represented organised Indigenous resistance that it was part of the resistance that delayed settlement in the Lockyer Valley and Darling Downs by about 15 years of armed conflict, which I didn't know it had gone on that. Well, it went on for a while, but 15 years in that area was a big impact. So, look, there was a large-scale settler response following the Battle of One Tree Hill, where they sent about 75 to 100 armed men, including soldiers from the 99th Regiment and police, with pursuit and camp raids that killed many of the warriors. So Multigurra escaped the October 1843 assault, but he was killed in 1846 during continuing raids in the area, and then smaller groups continued ambushes for another 5 years. A couple of details on Multugurra's leadership and strategies. So he was also known as Young Moppy after his dad. And he built on his dad's efforts to forge and lead a broad coalition known as the Mountain Tribes Alliance. So as I said before, that was seven and possibly more neighbouring clans, including from the Darling Downs, Lockyer Valley and surrounding areas. And there are estimates of the alliance's potential strength that it reached over 1,000 to 1,200 warriors at its peak, which is a lot of people in those days. So his primary strategic focus was targeting vulnerable supply lines from Moreton Bay to Darling Downs and Lockyer Valley. So he recognised that the single mountain road was essential for delivering food and tools and supplies to squatters while enabling the wool transport going back. So by disrupting those lines, he aimed to isolate and starve out the settlements, effectively placing large areas under siege through constant raids, ambushes and patrols. So he used key tactics of pre-battle warnings and psychological warfare. Like he said, explicit warnings to the Europeans saying, don't go here or bad things are going to happen. He used guerrilla ambushes and was master of the terrain, so using the falling logs, sapling barricades, fenced side roads to block and immobilise bullock drays on steep boggy or thickly brushed sections, attacking from concealed positions, and exploiting surprise and close quarter weapons like spears. He also understood defensive high ground positions and improvised weapons, as we said, when they'd retreated to a place they'd already planned and already had the rocks and boulders and spears already up there. He was apparently good at feigning retreat and luring enemies into kill zones or traps for further rocks from above. He had employed raiding disruption tactics where he'd do like lightning raids on outstations and sheep runs, keep settlers pinned to their huts for days while they took their livestock. And arguably one of his biggest skills was that he was a real diplomat and spiritual leader, unifying disparate groups for collective action and keeping that resistance going even after personal losses. He did encourage use of traditional magic and claimed abilities like stopping bullets, which boosted morale. But his campaigns involving these hit-and-run actions and evasions and continued ambushes were immensely successful. So he used those, and it made the Battle of One Tree Hill one of the rare, clear Indigenous victories in the Australian frontier wars, where, as we know from previous Two Ticks Town talks, it really didn't go well. But here, the settlers were routed in both ambush and counter-attack. We don't often get a chance to cover successful pushbacks against European settlement, but it's part of our history, and hopefully you found something you didn't know in this week's Two Ticks Town Talk on Toowoomba in Queensland.
Very interesting. You're right. We don't hear very often about the well, I think partially because it was quite rare. There was obviously a significant technological divide between what a lot of the Aboriginal people, the native indigenous people of Australia had compared to a lot of the settlers. And I still cannot get over the fact that a lot of European settlers had firearms, amongst other things. A lot of miners had explosives and things like that. But Aboriginals would still not necessarily fully understanding exactly what was going on. Stick goes bang, and old mate's dead, but still were prepared to fight against this. I think that takes real courage. That's a lot of balls to run in against and absolutely fiercely defending what they rightfully saw as theirs. I think that's something we don't, talk about probably enough. The courage of these men to protect what their home, essentially. And depending on how you feel about it, whether that's fortunate or unfortunately, they quite often lost. And this is a rare situation where they essentially didn't. I am curious, very much so, about how old mate got his buttocks speared, I assumed.
Maybe it was running away, taking off downhill. I mean, that would have been. You would have had I can imagine there being a certain arrogance, thinking, "Oh, there's plenty of us, and we've got the guns," and then being in a situation thinking, "Oh, hang on, we've just been led into a situation where we're now downhill, and we've got these bloody boulders rolling down the hill. We've got muskets shattering around us. We've got people getting speared or spears falling down. We're getting hit in the head with rocks, and that it would." I can understand a few of them thinking, "Nah, out of here."
Yeah. No, 100%. Especially, you're right. When you've got that degree of technological superiority, the last thing you expect is that, right? I do wonder about the buttocks thing. Now that I say that, if
you're obsessed with these buttocks.
Well, I'm curious as to know why they mention it in multiple sources, and I am wondering if
that's why I mentioned it, because it was mentioned a couple of times, and I didn't understand what the attraction was. In something so serious. Maybe it was just one of those things of, because it's Australian history, there's a certain amount of that just juvenile amusement that I could have been. I did read somewhere else, and I hadn't got in there, that sometimes the Aboriginals would taunt them by showing them their buttocks, maybe a la. What was that Mel Gibson one?
Braveheart.
I love that Braveheart thing. So who knows? Maybe he thought, I'll show my bum back to them, and regretted it.
Perhaps. I do wonder that if it's because it would be seen as he was retreating and they still attacked him. So maybe that's why it was mentioned multiple times, going, look, see, he was running away and they still had a go at him. I don't know. That's speculation on my part.
Yeah, okay, I can see that angle too.
Yeah, but maybe not. It does seem kind of funny. So, but no, very interesting. I do think there is this sort of a myth in the Australian sort of the stories we tell about our country, where we forget how fierce resistance was fought against settlement of Europeans here in Australia. I think a lot of people still don't fully understand or appreciate the fact that it wasn't a peaceful settlement of the country. It was often very violent from both sides, but primarily I would say a lot of it was instigated by the European settlers, but not totally. And so this is a different story than we normally told. So very good.